Hey y'all, welcome to episode 18 of the Stay at Home Son podcast. And today we have a very special episode. We are going to be reviewing the indie Hawaiian film thriller Namaka. We got the director right here, and we're going to have just a great talk about this film. We really enjoyed this film. It has a lot going on. So, first of all, I want to welcome Frank to the show. Thanks for being on, man.
Hello, or should I say aloha? I'm very happy to be here. Thrilled to talk about Namaka.
Awesome. Well, we're thrilled to talk to you about it. I actually watched it twice because one time I liked it so much. I said, "Hey, mom, you want to watch this with me?" So I had my mom come watch it with me, and we watched it this morning. She really enjoyed it as well. And
Nice.
yeah, this film has so much cool things going about it, so much things interesting. So I want to say, Hawaiian and horror don't normally go hand in hand. Hawaiian and thriller don't normally go hand in hand. So how are you able to get that inspiration to make this film like that?
I started out as I had this idea for a dark fantasy film where a normal guy, our main character is on a vacation somewhere exotic, and then strange things start happening. And so I was really interested in the clash between the normal world and something mythological, something unexplainable. And so around the time that I was starting to develop the idea for the movie, I happened to take a vacation to Hawaii. And while I was there, I started doing research on Hawaiian mythology. And there's actually a lot of dark aspects to it. We talk about the night marchers in the movie. It's the very scary concept. And so I thought, you know what? Even this, I sort of liked that dichotomy, like you said, like this. I wanted to do a movie that was very beautiful, that would draw you in, because that's the thing about tropical locations and also tiki culture, which is something that people really find so inviting, and yet there's a dark side, there's a danger aspect to it. I'm thrilled that you watched it twice too, because I think the movie works, because there's sort of a twist ending. It sort of works on a whole different level once you realize what Namaka is all about. Although I won't, I don't want to spoil it, but I did think that this is a movie that's going to hold up to multiple viewings.
And just
Yeah.
off of that,
Yeah.
one of my favorite parts of the movie was, in fact, the Hawaiian lore and
Mhm.
culture and stuff like that. So how much research went into that? Like, did you have a team of people doing that, or just
Y-
yourself?
y-
Or
well, definitely not just me. One of the first people, when I first wrote the first draft, I mean, I did a bunch of research on my own, read a lot of books on the subject, and then the very first person I showed the script to was my friend Akeme Welsh, who is a Hawaiian cultural advisor, and she actually worked on Lilo and Stitch actually as a cultural advisor, and she gave me some notes, and she was helpful in terms of there's the luau and some of the gods and goddesses, but she also gave me the freedom to make my own story. She pointed out part of what this is a synthesis of these traditional Hawaiian lore, and then the what this outsider who comes in on vacation and doesn't quite understand everything, and he's bumbling his way through it. Well, by doing that, I'm creating my own mythology. I felt the freedom to sort of take the story where I needed to take the story, while being respectful to the actual traditions.
and have there been instances like that in Hawaii where somebody saw something paranormal and they've phoned it in, but nobody's believed them or something like that?
Absolutely. I think that I mean, the Guy Torino podcast aspect of the story, that allowed me to draw from some actual incidents that I had read about, right? So there's the thing with the night marchers. A lot of people have experienced strange sounds and lights at night. In Hawaii, the story of the water ghost, and which and then the story of not being allowed to take pork from one side of the island to the other. People have those were based on actual reports of unexplained phenomenon.
Yeah, and I have a question too
Uh-huh.
about just the way it felt, the intimacy of the cast. You know, for a film, it didn't have a whole lot of cast, but the cast that was there was very well developed, and it always felt like they all had that kind of connection. So,
Hmm.
how'd you go about casting for this film? Was it a
Well,
hard process finding the right people? Because I think you did a phenomenal job.
well, thank you. And that, this is obviously it's an independent film, and so we didn't have unlimited resources. And so, it started with, what what is the smartest way to make a movie that's going to be, um, you know, budget conscious. And really, you got to have great performances, right? And so it's a small cast. There's not that many locations in the movie. Those are budget friendly things, right, for an independent film. And so I really wanted to lean on amazing performances and amazing chemistry between the three lead actors, right? And so Jamie Kennedy was the first cast. He's somebody who I sort of imagined in that role when I was writing it. I was a big fan of him in Scream. Back in the day, he was the first and second Scream movies. He plays Randy Meeks, the horror expert. And I always sort of thought of this like I was so devastated when Randy was killed off in Scream 2, and I sort of imagined what if he had faked his own death, changed his name, moved to Hawaii, and becomes like a conspiracy theorist podcaster. That was sort of my concept as I was writing it. And so I had Jamie Kennedy's voice as I wrote it. And so I reached out to him, and he read it, loved the script, and he signed on before we had anything else, right? So he agreed to do the movie, and that helped me find the rest of the financing, and that then I was able to attract great talent for the other roles. So for the Namaka role and for Alex, the other lead, I just had an open audition in Los Angeles for that, and so we did it virtually at first. You put out a casting announcement, and I described those two characters. Namaka has to be a goddess. Alex is just sort of this, everyman
Yeah.
character. And I got nearly 1,000 submissions for the Alex role, and I got several hundred submissions for Namaka. And so based on that, I invited about 100 of each to do an on tape, like a self tape that they sent me. Based on those self tapes, I whittled that down to about 20 each that we did an in-person callback, because having the chemistry was very important for me, right? And so for those two roles, it was just a lengthy process of going through, a lot of auditions, and finding the perfect Namaka and the perfect Alex for my movie.
Well, I
How
think
did
you.
you
Oh, you go
yeah, I
ahead,
was just gonna
Thomas.
ask you how did you get like the acting crew and the cameras and stuff like off of the mainland to Hawaii? Because
We
like that's probably like the most expensive part, like flying
for
everything all
sure.
the way there.
For sure. So there, some of this movie was filmed in Los Angeles, and some of it was in Hawaii. And so we did. So, like for example, Jamie Kennedy, all of his scenes are actually shot in Los Angeles. So that's one of these movie tricks, because the Hawaii stuff is very expensive, and that was a limitation for us. And so we did a minimal crew to Hawaii. And in fact, that's sort of that hat cam aspect where some of the movie is seen from Alex's point of view. That was really sort of that. I mean, that came creatively in the writing process because I wanted this movie to have a little bit of a found footage aspect to it, and I felt like that POV footage would be very immersive, right? And I liked the idea of, because I was always sort of playing with the whether or not Namaka is actually real, right? And so I liked the idea that she's not going to appear on camera, and so that would get him sort of, that would make Alex feel very isolated because he's experiencing these things and he doesn't have any proof. There's the scene where he's trying to explain to the police officers, right, what he saw, but he has no proof because she's not on video. And so, but that ended up allowing us to shoot a lot of the Hawaii stuff with a extremely limited crew because we didn't have to deal with lighting. You're just using natural light, and so we're leaving a very small footprint. And so that's sort of, if we had more money, we would have shot the whole movie on location. But there's, movie tricks, sometimes you got to be creative. And so certain parts of this movie were shot in Los Angeles and you know, standing in for Hawaii.
Well, I thought it was really clever about how you did the found footage scenes in the Hawaii. I thought that
Mhm.
was really cool because it added to the immersion. It also made the film kind of feel like, this is the vacation part, this is the family vacation part, and then this is his experience with Namaka. So it kind of got that separation that he's living that double life. I think it really did a good job. And also it saves a bunch of money filming it that way too.
I'm glad
Smart.
you enjoy. I'm glad you picked up on that because yes, with that vacation, my idea is every time we go into what I call the vacation montages, and there's several of them throughout the movie, and that the vacation starts to get less and less fun as the movie goes along, and he's getting further ensnared by Namaka, right? And so when I was working on the score with the very talented composer Talib Peshkapia, we talked about creating a theme that would feel very romantic, very much like a Hawaiian vacation, right? And based on sort of mid-century exotica sounds. And we would establish that scene in the early vacation. We would establish that sound in the early vacation montages, and then that sound would start to corrupt as we go. And then if you sort of think later in the movie when they're still on vacation, but they're seeing craggy rocks and less pretty locations, and he starts to become more and more paranoid about being followed by Namaka. The soundtrack also starts to deteriorate in a way
Yeah, I
and become
noticed
less
that.
pretty.
Yeah, about that kind of deterioration, almost like that uncanniness of the sound. One scene that really creeped me out was when you all were doing like the POV when it was really getting into it when he realized like this is a serious problem for me, and she showed two trailers how you hear Namaka whispering, but it's in the
Uh-huh.
POV shot. That was really creepy. I really enjoyed
Cool.
that. Yeah, that
Cool.
was well done.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I would say one of the cool parts of the film that I really enjoyed was when he realizes that Jamie Kennedy's character is not actually what he says he is on his podcast. He thinking this guy's gonna believe him and he's gonna trust him and what he's saying, and then you find out that he's actually doesn't really believe what he's telling people, which I thought was pretty cool. It kind of shows that wow, you're really on your own here with this.
Yes, exactly. And that was the I always wonder, you listen to, I mean, obviously that podcast is based on some real, there are plenty of, supernatural call-in shows, um, and and you sort of wonder how much of this do they really believe and how much of this is them, you know, getting clicks and likes, right?
Yeah.
And so I love the idea of a character who presents himself as a believer in all things supernatural. And of course, when it was important to me that Alex, our main character, would meet Guy Torino before he meets Namaka, because this when Guy Torino first presents himself as this all-knowing, believer in all things mythological, right? It sets Alex up to also believe those things. So when he meets this girl in the woods, he's immediately starts to wonder, wait, maybe I'm experiencing something supernatural, something unexplained. And so yeah, that was the twist where Guy sort of admits he's a fake. That allowed me to give Guy Torino an arc in the movie where, in an off-screen scene, he goes and does more research. And so by the end of the film, he does start to believe, right? Because he's seen these things that Alex is going through. And so, you have, Alex has disrupted the natural order, once he is ensnared with Namaka, and then the volcano starts to erupt because Pele is angry, and that is a very common thing. Every time there is an eruption in Hawaii, the Hawaiians will say, "Oh, that's Pele." Pele's upset, right? And so the idea that Namaka's sister, who's not of this realm, Namaka does reveal by the end of the film that she's stuck here and her sister isn't. But there's that last scene between Guy and Alex that I'm very proud of that scene because it allowed Guy Torino to come around to actually maybe believing that there's something unexplained happening here, you know. And I was, in fact, when I set up that scene, because it's a, it's a pretty, I don't know, it's a six, I think it's a 6 or 7 minute dialogue scene that's just these two guys sitting at a booth in the tiki bar, and they've got this stack of books. And I remember when we were filming this, going back to what I said about Randy Meeks in Scream 2, that was such an inspiration for me. I said to Jamie when we were shooting that, I was like, okay, this is that scene in Scream 2 that's you and David Arquette just sitting in the cafeteria. And it was like this 6 minute dialogue scene of the two of them trying to, go through the whole plot and to figure out, who could be the killer. I said, you made that scene work 25 years ago. You're going to make this scene work. Just dialed in. You're serious. You care about this stuff. And he did it. And I just, that's my personal favorite scene in the movie.
Yeah, no, it was weird seeing Randy in a Hawaiian shirt for sure. That was, that
I
was
think my personal favorite
Yeah.
is I think towards the end when they blood mix, just because like that's when like the viewers start to realize that like Namaka's not
Right.
all that she presented herself to be,
Uh-huh.
and it comes like full circle. It's like, oh, so she's not actually like she wants to keep him here forever. Like she's not actually like on his side per se. Like,
Right. So that was part of the fun with that character, with Namaka, working with Ash Sai, the actress who played that role, is because we actually we only see her five times, right? She's in 5 scenes of the movie, and each one she's a little different version of Namaka. And that was something that was fun to me because she is obviously she's not who she appears to be. We discover that a little bit more and more as time goes on, right? And because to me, the idea that she is an immortal, she's going to experience the world very differently than we do, right? And so she's gotten really good at this by doing it over and over. She understands how to manipulate somebody, how to how to get what she wants out of them, and she's sort of addicted to being in love, which is, I think, something a lot of people can relate to, right? So getting that rush, that high of having of oh, I'm in love, and I'm going to keep this guy forever. But what is forever really when she's immortal and he's not, right? So it was almost like when we were on set, we were talking about, it's like, oh, it's like getting a puppy, right? You get a puppy, you fall in love with the puppy, but you're only going to have that puppy for maybe 10 years,
yeah.
and then you're going to go through it again and get another puppy, and that's just the life cycle, because dogs don't live as long as people, right?
Yeah, no, it was interesting. It kind of tugged on the heartstrings a little bit because you're
Sure.
seeing Alexander's character and you see him kind of scared of like, I don't want to ruin my family life for this, but yet he keeps going back out into the woods and trying to find her because he's so captivated by her.
Yes,
And
I don't.
it shows that struggle.
Yes, well, and that's the thing, is I didn't want this movie to have good guys and bad guys. I wanted it to be very morally ambiguous and that's I think also another fun, a reason that makes this movie worth rewatching is to sort of decide for yourself, is he a good guy or a bad guy? You know what I mean? Because he does make some very poor decisions along the way. Of course he does. And but I, and he keeps saying, I'm under a spell. I've been put a spell has been put on me. So he's not taking responsibility for his actions, right? And but this, and this is when people fall in love. I think this is again something that people can relate to, that it sort of feels like something outside of ourselves, right? And so, this mythology, well, like Cupid is a character from, is Roman mythology, I think, like the idea that there are these entities out there that are causing us to feel these things. That's sort of how it feels, right? And so yeah, I think he probably means well. But another key thing for that character Alex is that he is, I don't know if he's depressed, but he's certainly going through some personal stuff in terms of his career, right, and his music. So it was very key to me that he opens up to Namaka in that one scene and talks about how he was in a band that never really took off, but now the lead singer has gone solo and he's doing great, right? So Alex to me is an artist at heart who is feeling unmoored because he no longer has the band, that he no longer has the dream of success. And when we first meet him at the beginning of the movie, he tells his wife, hey, when I get there, I'm going to get a ukulele. Maybe that'll be the solution for me, right? Maybe it'll be the new sound that I need for my career to take off, right? So we're finding a guy who's struggling with himself, and an artist who is no longer believing in his own art, and so that allows Namaka to make him fall in love with her very easily when she sort of fawns over him, over his music.
Yeah,
That's
no,
very flattering for him, of course. Something he needed to hear, right?
yeah, he needed to hear that someone likes his music because I mean, I remember that scene where he says, "But his bandmate took off and had this successful career, but
Right.
the other guys, just no one liked them." So when a girl comes and says she likes your music like that and just likes who you are so quick, but I'll tell you personally though, I would have been out right when they started tying that doll to the conch shell and saying all those chants. I don't care how pretty they are, I'm getting out of there.
Smart
Yeah,
man,
that's what I
smart
would have
man.
done. But I went,
Yeah.
yeah, but one thing I thought that was kind of interesting about the film, and I don't know if this was intentional or not, but
Mhm.
you never really put too much of an emphasis on the relationship dynamic between Alexander and his wife, you know? It's kind of like you just kind of see it through the lens of the POV footage, but it's kind of like hard to really tell like if they really had a strong general connection. I enjoyed that because it kind of made it look like in a weird way, he might have already not been fulfilled into the relationship going in. I don't know if that was intentional, but I kind of felt like even before the whole Namaka thing, I was like, he might not be completely fulfilled with this woman he's with right now. That's just something I picked up.
No, totally. I thought that getting the right tone for that opening scene, because we don't see very much of the two of them together, right? And I just wanted it to seem like a marriage that's, it's not in the dumps, but they're also not in the honeymoon phase, right? They're just, they're like they're they're more focused on this vacation. He's more focused on his music. They're definitely not focused on each other. And there's a little bit of a symbolism in that opening scene where they take their wedding rings off, and they don't, because they don't want to take their wedding rings on vacation where they might lose them, which is actually, so it's like, is that a good idea? It's a symbol of maybe how committed they are to each other.
Yeah, and the fact that right when he gets on the island, the first thing he does is go to the bar by himself, you know?
Yes, yeah,
Like he's trying to
yes,
take
and
advantage.
that's the thing. He's being a little overwhelmed. He's feeling overwhelmed by being on a vacation with his in-laws, right? And so his wife's sister has a baby, and so he's feeling like he not really part of that nuclear family, right? He's looking for something else. He keeps saying it's about the music, and his wife keeps trying to pull him back in. And, she's certainly not the villain here, by any means. But there's that scene later on where she sort of confronts him and realizes that he hasn't been writing any music. He says he's disappearing all the time because he wants to write. And I put in a little reference to The Shining. Um, all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy, because that's another. First of all, The Shining is, I think, a similar movie in terms of tone to what I was trying to go for, where you have a guy who may or may not be losing his mind, right, and a very, very much a psychological thriller. And I just remember that scene in The Shining, when it is revealed that this novel he's been working on all year is not a novel at all. He's been writing gibberish, right? And so I just felt that moment would be really, really impactful when he's been on this nice Hawaiian vacation. He's been disappearing every day, telling his wife that he's been writing music. It's great, you know, just wait until you hear it. And then she finds his notebook and he hasn't actually written anything.
Yeah, I like that y'all shout out The Shining too. That's one of my favorite movies, and I could totally see the
Yep.
similarities. It's like The Shining in Paradise.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly.
But we're indie filmmakers ourselves, and we know
Uh-huh.
how hard it is to make these things. And we want to applaud you for doing such a phenomenal job with this
Thank you.
film. And we always like to ask our filmmakers that come on the show, what was the hardest day on set? Was there one scene in particular, or one day that was just like, wow, this is really not going the way we need it to go? Because I feel like every
So
film has those.
yes, I mean, funny enough, it was one of the days with Jamie where there's two key scenes at his studio, his home studio, and we shot. They're two fairly long scenes, and we shot them both in one day, right? So we had one day at that location, and it was a great location, but it had this huge, if you know the scenes I'm talking about, it's like this big bay window, like one whole wall is just all windows, and you just see this tropical paradise beyond the window, which was a perfect location. It just really felt like I was looking for, I wanted a house that would feel like not necessarily Guy Torino's house, but more like the house he may have inherited from his mother, right? and but you then had the reality of fighting the light, because we had natural light coming through that window, and it was just, this is a sort of a technical thing where we had to diffuse the light. We had to make a lot of adjustments because again, these are long scenes we're doing, and you're trying to match the light and keep the light the same for each of those scenes. And as we were getting towards it was just, I knew it would be a long day, and I knew that we would have to be, we had to be done by the time we were losing light, right? And because we were relying on that natural light coming through the window, and again, because they're long scenes, you have to try to keep the light as steady as possible. And if you remember, the second of those two scenes ends with the big sort of argument where Alex gets very upset, and he's standing in front of the fireplace, and the two of them are sort of shouting at each other a little bit, right? And then they calm down and they apologize, and that sort of ends that scene. Well, we were probably 10 minutes away from losing light when we got to that scene, and I was, it wasn't my finest moment as a director, because I'm starting to panic, because we like I said, we only had that one day at that location, right? And I'm like, we just got to shoot this damn thing. Come on, guys, come on, let's go, let's do this. And so the higher tensions that was happening at that time fed itself into the scene, and so the scene got hotter between those two characters than I had initially intended, and it actually it made for more drama, because they were like actually kind of shouting at each other, and I think real world tensions were sort of blending in with the fiction that we were creating. And then they start to calm down and they apologize to each other. And right as we were losing light, so that end of the scene where he's like, hey, I'm sorry I yelled. He said, I'm sorry I dropped an F-bomb on the air. He says, it's okay, it's okay. It was almost like a real world apology, right? Because and man, we got through it. We said cut, just as we lost the light, and it was thrilling that we got it all. But that was definitely the hardest day, because we were doing a lot. I mean, that was probably 14 pages, I think, or 14 pages in one day. It's an insane amount of stuff.
Yeah, that's so funny that you mentioned the tension, because I remember when I saw that, I was like, man, Randy really cares about FCC violations.
Yes, totally,
I
totally.
was like,
Yes.
it's
Yeah, as former
crazy.
radio host, I can relate.
Yeah, no.
Right. He doesn't want to get kicked off the air.
But I just want to wrap up here. I want to
Uh-huh.
say thank you so much for coming on the show. We really enjoyed this film. I will link the description below for everyone who wants to watch Namaka. This is an amazing film and just a really good story about great indie filmmaking. So thank you so much for coming on the show, Frank, and I hope you all have a wonderful day. And remember, stay at home.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.